Were you told to eat right in postpartum and you have no idea what the hell that means? We go to answer those questions on my interview on the Active Postpartum podcast today with Annyck and Steph from Sööma Nutrition. We dive into the biggest nutritional challenges they see in postpartum moms who are trying to lose weight, breastfeed, and return to workouts. We talk a little bit about the prevalence of Red S syndrome and nutrition in postpartum moms. We talk about easy tips for moms to improve their nutrition after baby, and also talk about how past history with eating disorders potentially impact nutrition in postpartum. Make sure you dive into this episode. You won't want to miss it if you've ever had questions about what you should be eating in pregnancy and postpartum. The episode starts now. All right, the age-old question in postpartum is, now that I've had a kid, how am I supposed to eat? How am I supposed to get my body back? How do I get my nutrition? And I cannot tell you how long I have been looking for nutritionists and dietitians, and I have stumbled upon these two lovely ladies and moms, Stefanie and Annyck from Sööma Nutrition. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining me on the Active Mom Postpartum podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, Stefanie and Annyck, and am I saying it wrong?
You can say Annyck, but
Annyck.
it's just because it's like French and English. So.
I was gonna say
yeah.
French was not the class. I
Yeah.
stuck with as I was saying it. I was like, I'm saying it with the wrong accent. I've got to go French. Ooh la la. Annyck, why don't we start with you? How did you get into all this?
Oh, okay. I'm going to make it brief, but I went into dietetics specifically to work with eating disorders, actually. So I loved science. I loved working with people. And then I did a bachelor's, I did a master's, and then really went into the field of eating disorders. And now I see mostly eating disorders and also athletes. And I recently became a mom and I'm also expecting baby number 2 soon. So I do have an interest as well now for, moms that are active. I particularly have a soft spot for runners. And I think in the postpartum period, there is really that vulnerability of like not connecting with your body. A lot of encouragement about like diets and disordered eating. So, a lot of training, but a lot of personal interest kind of in the field for the past like 9 years.
That's when it's good, though. That's when you've got the vested interest in it. That's when it's good. Definitely.
Yeah.
Stefanie, how about you?
Yeah, well, I actually went into dietetics initially because I was so interested with the impact of food on chronic disease because it was something that was so prevalent in my family. And I started in that direction. And then as I started working and as I started learning, there was so much around diet culture, so much around, people trying to lose weight and all of the myths and all of the, everything that went into that, and how I noticed that there was like so much disordered eating going on through that. And kind of my career took a turn where I was like, hey, it's like super important for us to be looking at this more in detail. And things kind of went in that direction, and I ended up meeting with Annyck, and now we've been working together for a little bit. And so we both, like her, I also work a lot with eating disorders at our clinic, and also a lot of sports nutrition. So I do have a history in that training world as well. And so we do find that there's quite a bit of an overlap between the two. And so also like Annyck, I'm also newly a mom, and I'm also expecting baby number 2. So we just have to be following each other's footsteps.
Get it. You get it, because there's nothing worse than somebody's like, hey, why don't you do some meal planning and give you like a 40-hour homework assignment? You're like, no, I'm not doing that. All right, so you get it. So let's dive right in for you guys. And again, we're going to bias the conversation a little bit more towards pregnant and postpartum moms. But I do think one of the things is you're both mentioning disordered eating, that comes up a lot. And it's conversations that I'm having more with moms about because in postpartum, we're trying to figure out, what we should eat, how we should eat. We want to fuel ourselves for sport. We want to make sure our kids' breast milk is not, turning into this awful like goo because they can't handle the protein, like all that kind of stuff. But we go back and we think about, how did we eat as kids? Who were our examples? I think we've talked before about, at least children of the 70s, our moms, they ate, caloric deficit. They ate to lose weight, that kind of stuff. Like, what are you finding are the biggest nutritional challenges for these moms now? They're trying to lose weight, they get their body back, still breastfeed, return to workouts. What are the biggest challenges?
I think personally and professionally, what I see, this pressure of like getting your body back, and like it being celebrated, like how quickly you get your body back in the media. And I think there's a lot of pressure on moms that, while you're pregnant, it's like beautiful, get bigger, and that's
Right.
like celebrated because you're growing this human. And then postpartum, your body is soft, and now your baby's out in the world and everyone's just kind of talking about your physique and kind of putting this pressure to go back to
Yes.
like prior to your pregnancy, which I had a physiotherapist that said, like, you're not going back. Like, you had a baby, your body changes. And how do we now support kind of this body going forward? So I would say one of the biggest challenges is like the rush to lose
Yes.
weight. And moms that breastfeed or don't breastfeed, it's that you have an extreme demand energetically on your body. But I think because you feel so drained and tired and probably not efficient in air quotes, it's hard to realize like how much energy your body is needing to produce breast milk, to wake
Yeah.
up 10 times in the night. So the biggest thing that I see actually is under fueling, because
Yes.
when you're under fueling, obviously the body metabolically is going to make changes to try to protect the organism. And I think that that's where it can become harder for moms to say, well, I'm not eating anything, I'm counting calories, I'm doing this, and my body's not changing. But I try to bring a different perspective of like, how do we fuel? How do you nourish yourself? How do you be patient with your body?
Yeah.
Steph, I'll let you add.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of my opinion definitely stems around that, where there is a lot of pressure. And I think the other thing is that's really hard too is a lot of the misinformation going on. During my first pregnancy, I was part of one of these like Facebook mommy groups. And you really do see a lot of interesting stuff go on
Yes.
there, where it's such a like a lovely community for some support, but then there would be other women sometimes posting around either the weight gain during pregnancy or worried about their body postpartum. And then you kind of start reading about the comments and you see all of the information that people are sharing, and it's all over the place, and a lot of it aligned with calorie counting and restricting and these kinds of diets. And how one is saying, well, I did this and I lost X amount of weight and I did that and I did this, and it gets really overwhelming because it keeps reinforcing that message that you should be doing something to change your body actively as soon as you've given birth, and
Right.
that it should be fast and that this should be easy and this is the way it is. And um, it does create a lot of that pressure, and a lot of it isn't realistic. A lot of it isn't great information and could lead you to definitely in that cycle of undernourishing, underfueling, in a state where, like we said, you're already exhausted. If you are breastfeeding, there is a lot of demand on the body as well. You're not sleeping properly. There's so much that goes into it. You're carrying this extra child that's not inside of you, but you're still carrying a lot outside of you. And so those are a lot of things that need to be considered.
Yeah, I feel like and you guys will have to let me know after you have your next ones. I felt there was far more pressure the first time around, or it was that pressure on yourself that you had something to prove. And I do, again, being brought up with, that deficit calorie culture, and you didn't have a ton of time. Like my oldest, I could not put him down to do anything. That's just who he was. And I remember thinking, oh, well, this is great because I'll lose the weight and, it'll be great and I'll be able to get back doing this. Which was not the right mindset at all. And I think that also comes along with, we know so much more. We'll bring the parallel from like sport and performance. Like so many of our athletes are under fueling. We're hearing a lot about, I don't know if you guys have read, it's blanking, Lauren Fleshman's book, Good for a Girl.
Good for a Girl. Yeah.
Yeah. And even, oh God, she's just the longest race, Kara Goucher.
Yeah.
They both talk about, this idea that to be trim. And again, I think there's so much that goes back to what we were taught when we were kids, and we go into pregnancy thinking that goes true. And I cannot tell you how many times I have moms come into this office and they want their 20-something body back, or they want a flat belly. And my first question is, have you ever had a flat belly? And do you know how many times they say no? Most of the time. I've never had a flat belly. Like, quite honestly, like I've looked back, it's not, something I've forgotten about. Like it just wasn't there. And so we have these expectations of almost being prepubescent in our bodies.
Yeah.
But we had conversations before about Red S. And so relative, and we've had other people come, Tina Muir's talked about it, relative energy deficiency in sport, and really how the prevalence is there in the postpartum period, where you're under fueling, you're not getting enough sleep, you're overtraining. Like, is this something that you guys, now that you're a mom, does this make sense to you? Are you starting to see this? Are you concerned that this is actually happening far more often in this culture to get our bodies back?
You want me to go? Definitely, because, even if I can maybe talk from a little bit of personal experience, in that 3 to 6 month postpartum phase, I was breastfeeding and I wasn't even being like that active. I was just being, a mom with a new baby, basically.
Yes. You were surviving.
Trying to manage, and my daughter also could not be put down. So all of the naps were like in the baby carrier, we're on the walk, we're this and that. So I had to kind of move all the time to just manage the situation. And I remember at that point having such a hard time keeping up with fueling. It was so hard. And I remember feeling just exhausted. I would go up the stairs and I would be out of breath and I could feel my muscles be so tired. And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm not even an athlete. I'm not even trying to, get back into running or get back into training or doing anything like that. And so, although there is a lot of pressure, 3 months postpartum, it's like you got to get back into that. And so I could only imagine how not being in that physical activity section of things yet, and already almost feeling, I thought malnourished almost, because I was having such a hard time keeping up. And so I can only imagine that you bring in that physical activity level, and this is where things start getting really, really tricky.
Yeah, I think it's a slippery slope. Annyck, what do you think?
Yeah, I think too, what's tough is, in my personal experience, the postpartum realm, there's not that much information about like fueling, about healing the body. I think more and more we're talking about this like return to run and like taking time before we really return to sport. But because of that pressure, I think there's this huge, like, there's a lot of people that want to get back to training, want to get back to running, and you're comparing your performance, in air quotes, with like your previous self, without, you discount almost that like your body spent all this time building a baby and now needs this time to recover from the delivery, needs to also maybe breastfeed or also recover from the lack of sleep. And I think we talk about REDS in the context of like an athlete, but not in the context of like, oh, a postpartum mom who's not sleeping, who might be under fueling, who's trying to go out for a 20-minute run, but that is like extremely like high demand on the body, even though
Yep.
she may have been used to running like 3 times that amount. So I think in my work with friends with postpartum moms, it's looking at the lifestyle and how are we approaching this and can we be flexible about it? That, a lot of people, I think runners in general are not very flexible. So it's like, if I can't run an hour, let's not
Right.
20 minutes. But kind of this more a gentle approach to nutrition, to training, and also a lot more education in that realm, hopefully for doctors, for PTs, for dietitians, that this person in front of you has this like previous identity as an athlete, as
Yep.
an active individual, and there's a huge grieving process to that. There was for me, at least.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that because you're not who you used to be, that you don't need to fuel, that you can't perform in a different way. And I think the biggest mistake is kind of being fused with, no, it has to be like it was. And I'm
Right.
also a postpartum mom who wants to like get her body back, in air quotes. So what's all the misinformation that I'm like hooking on to that's really
Right.
setting me up for an energy deficit and like chronic injuries, fatigue, and like this difficulty to like bounce back, we'll say.
Right. Right. Let's dive into fueling a little bit, because if you're my generation, child of the 70s, um, we had the food pyramid, which was super helpful, not. Um, you know, carbs are bad, fat's bad, protein, oh, maybe I'll go vegan. Like we're it's whiplash over here. And I think for me,
Mm,
relatively recently, it's only been kind of since my kids were a little bit older, and it's more on the performance side that I've been aware of kind of what fueling actually is. And I think it's far more prevalent of a conversation in the athlete world. Um, can
mm,
we talk about kind of those two separate things? Like, what does fueling look like for, somebody who's pregnant versus somebody who's postpartum versus somebody who's postpartum and maybe working, towards an athletic endeavor or training or something along those lines? Like, how does that change? How do you determine what somebody's fueling requirements are?
Oh, that's a complicated question.
Well, let's go like super high level. What's
Yeah.
what's
I'm like, okay, how do I simplify this?
go high
Um,
level.
like any complicated question, my answer is like, it depends,
I
which
know,
is
and that's why I love you. And that was the answer I was looking for.
very unsatisfying. It's like, what does this
So,
mean?
yeah, let's go basic. Like if I'm newly pregnant, like
Yeah.
generally, like what should I be paying attention to, any sort of increase in protein or carbs or,
Ooh.
fats or things like that? Or should I just not worry too much?
mm.
Yeah, Steph, I don't know if you have an answer yet.
Yeah, I
Assuming no
think
medical problems, kind of all that sort of like
no,
stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
I would be tempted to say not to worry
Yeah.
about it too much because any hypervigilance or giving over, um, you know, putting more attention than it's required on food will tend to bring up other stuff.
Yep.
Um, and I think the strategies will really depend on how you are going through your pregnancy. Do you have a lot of nausea or morning sickness? That will
Right.
change how you may choose to fuel what your strategies are going to be. If you're experiencing more cravings and things like that, that may kind of change how you may approach things as well. But Annick, I don't know if you agree with this, but a lot of the times I would say, if you listen to your body's cues, you are feeding yourself on a regular
Yeah.
basis. Most of the time, your body will just lead you into the right path.
I had the most perfect bite of food that I would go get when I worked at the hospital. Like I would get there at like 6:15, at about 8:50. So I apologize for my 8 o'clock patient because I always finish a little early. And my 9, I always finish late. I ran across the street, across the parking lot, and it was like the perfect bite of like a quarter of a piece of French toast, the tiniest little bite of like it was Scrapple. Oh my God, it was so nasty. But it would given me a little salt and then like syrup. and it was like, it was only about like this, but that would keep me from hurling. And it was just enough to get me through till lunch, but it was the grossest thing. And if I had a bite too much, it was too much. Like it was just this perfect little bite of nastiness.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I remember with my last pregnancy, I was seeing my doctor and talking about how right now, like the only thing that kind of sounds good and feels good are bagels. And it was funny. I don't think he knew I was a dietitian. So he's like, you can't go through your pregnancy only eating bagels.
It's debatable.
But I think every person's body responds differently. And I
Yeah.
think there's an enormous amount of pressure on moms about nutrients and kind of getting the protein, the vegetables, the fruits, the carbs. And for me, I guess one thing I could say as like practical terms is try to find ways that you can have variety in like creative manners. So for me right now, like eating fruit feels like too acidic. I don't know. I don't love it. But Steph can attest to this. I just make smoothies. And smoothies are not something that I always eat, but in pregnancy, it's like I can have like my bagel with butter and then a smoothie
Yep.
to kind of hide some stuff in there, for example. Whereas somebody else, maybe like a smoothie just feels so gross and they
Yep.
can't have it. And for them, it would be easier to just have like a fruit with Nutella or something like that. So it's kind of having that flexibility and giving yourself permission to vary how you typically approach food because your body is growing a human. There are a bunch of aversions. There's like the reflux that happens.
Yeah.
But as you kind of move through your pregnancy, like your energy needs do get higher.
Yep.
So it kind of becomes tough to get everything that you need in when you're feeling really full, when maybe food doesn't sound that appealing. So kind of being gentle with yourself and trying to get creative and whatever
Yeah.
sounds good, I think.
Yeah, where I see the pregnancy food choices come up is not during pregnancy. And I think you guys kind of mentioned this earlier. There's this culture of, oh, do whatever you need
Mhm.
to, feel good in pregnancy. And then in postpartum, then I hear the women saying, oh, well, I shouldn't have done that. And it's just, it doesn't work that way,
Mhm.
Like I think I was, yeah, I was talking to my husband about this the other day. I hit 199 at my daughter, so my youngest, like right before she was born, and my husband's like, go for 200, you'll never be there again. But it wasn't like I have big freaking kids. Like it's not like
Mm.
that was all French toast,
Mhm. Yeah.
But that's so postpartum, I feel like and again, I think it was different between the first and the second. The first, I think I honestly was trying to like hit my food groups, but one of the things I ran into was I think I went too high protein with my
Mm.
youngest, and then he started having like mucousy stool and
Mm.
blood in his stool. And as soon as I cut out the Greek yogurt, it got better. And I also see moms struggle when their kids are having allergy issues because then they'll cut everything out and then they're eating like nothing. What tips can we give? Because I know moms like they're gonna do whatever it takes to make sure that their kid doesn't have, milk issues or this or that. Like where do we start with that?
So we're laughing because I had this experience and I would come to work and be just so frustrated
Yes, it's
and
stressful.
it's so stressful and it's really sad because, during your pregnancy, you're like, okay, I won't eat X, Y, and Z because I'm not allowed. And then you deliver, and all of a sudden you have all of these restrictions.
Right.
Um, I think my experience at least, doctors are very quick at being like, well, you just cut out this, cut out this, cut out this.
Right.
Um, and what happened with me was after 9 months, it just turns out that like our son did not have any of these allergies. And I was like, oh yeah, oops, I guess it wasn't that.
I
Um,
see that all the time. Meanwhile, you've had a like heart attack and coronary, and you've got ulcers now because you've been trying to fix this.
Yeah, it's really, really tough. But I know that, so for me, it was dairy. And then at one point, there was like a suspicion that it might have been gluten. So
Mhm.
cutting out dairy and gluten for me, I have so much compassion for people that have to do that because it was really, really difficult.
Mhm.
But I really tried, I think, as a dietitian, kind of trying to find sources of carbohydrates that were gluten free, trying to like find ways to make food items like higher fat, higher calories, because it becomes hard then to like have a complete meal.
Yes.
And to just, I think you have to give thought to it when there are restrictions, but to not overthink the like, I don't know, the croissant or the pastry or the cookies. Like I would make all these cookies and all these pastries that just kind of met those criteria, because food needs to be fun and interesting anyways.
Yeah.
So I guess my first thing is like, make sure that these restrictions are actually necessary.
Legit.
Most of the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and then
That's
after
a whole other podcast, by the way.
exactly. Yeah. Yes, I have a lot of opinions about that.
Yes. I'll get you together with my lactation consultant friend. You guys can go at it.
Yeah. Steph, I don't know if you would add anything to that.
I think a lot of my recent experience is just watching Annick go through it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is really hard to navigate because the restrictions are tough, and it is that tricky part between, I think, um, you know, in general, I think there is also that pressure to breastfeed, and then when you're caught up in this potential allergy situation and having to make that decision between, well, do I do these restrictions? But then, oh my gosh, like it has so much influence on my life, or do I go ahead with
Yeah.
the formula, because there is formula that exists
Right.
for that, and both options are good options. But sometimes I find it's hard to be a mom and really respect yourself in this, because the baby obviously is so important, but mom is so important in this situation too. And I think that too, sometimes there isn't a lot of space for exploring that, just how is the
Yeah.
mom's experience going to be through this. And it's okay to choose formula, or it's okay to choose the dietary restriction, but are we
Yep.
giving space for that conversation?
Yeah. No, I've seen more whiplash on that recently with moms that, because for a very long time, at least here locally, it's been breastfeed, breastfeed. And I've had a lot of moms recently that they were like, you know what? No, I'm good. I'm good. I want the sleep. I want to eat what I want. I don't want to have to worry about allergies. And I appreciate seeing that, because it's informed choice. And what's interesting is I've
Mhm.
even had moms tell me that they had made the decision before having a baby, and they were like, no, I'm not going to breastfeed. But the amount of pressure that they got in the hospital to breastfeed, and even like they had made this choice, sound mind and body, and then in that they were being challenged, and they're like, I'm really surprised how I second guessed myself. And that's just the other thing
Mhm.
too. Like if you're listening to this and you're pregnant, like there's conversations I can have with you pre-pregnancy and then postpartum that are going to be very different. They'll hit different because there's all this stuff that you don't see coming that I cannot possibly explain to you until you sit into that moment. That things that you
Mhm.
logically think you've got figured out, no.
Yes. Yeah.
And then when you have this
Yeah.
second kid too, and I wanted to shift to that as well. Like I think also the nutrition demands change too because you've got a toddler and a corner of a grilled cheese isn't a lunch. And that's all you've got time to kind of grab is like your kids' leftovers or those stupid little puffs that have they taste really bad, but you're like, all right, there's nothing else here. So you're eating like somebody's leftover yogurt that's stuck at the bottom and licking the lid and like maybe some puffs and stupid things like that. Like that doesn't count as fueling either. So
Mm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think a trick for that is if people go into offices to like keep kind of snacks in the office. Like at our office, we have a bunch of like random snacks that range from like trail mix, nuts, like bell soy yogurt, bell soy puddings, but also like goldfish and chocolate. We've been eating a lot of chocolate recently,
Yeah.
chocolate and granola bars. But then if you like throw your lunch together, but you don't have that much available to you, like you haven't done groceries, it's like you have a stash of snacks wherever you're going that you
yeah.
can kind of compensate your intake with, because I find my hunger is very unpredictable during the day. There are some days where I'm not really
Mhm.
hungry at all, and other days where what I packed is just not sufficient. And I do think like accounting for all the energy it takes to manage another child, like a young
Yes.
child, and running around after them while you're kind of trying to grow this other baby.
Yeah. No, I mean, you guys probably notice now, like you've got their snacks, but that's not, and I think there almost needs to be two snack bags. There needs to be the snack bag for your little one, and then it needs to be your snack bag. And we're really good about packing the kids' snack bag, but not ours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as far as like nutritional demands and stuff, I know a big change that I became aware of probably a couple years ago was just how our understanding of protein it's just progressed. Like how like normal people, like normal women, no babies, no medical issues, like how much protein should we be taking in? And then how does that demand change, like if we're, training for something?
Mm. Yeah, I think sometimes what's really interesting is that the amount of protein that a body needs can really range a lot more. I think we tend to think that there's an X amount for each person and we need to be on the nose and it's
Yeah.
really, really precise, but there is some flexibility to that. Um, and so, we kind of know that there's a lower limit that we're trying to reach in order to have good immune systems and good bodily functions and having your muscle mass and your organs work out properly. We have that, and then we'll kind of see that as you are more active, as you have more things going on in your body, so whether that's combating disease or being pregnant or lactating or all of these other things or being an athlete, we would slowly but surely increase the amount of protein you would need. But
Mhm.
that really does make sense because as you're going through those steps, your intake typically needs to increase as well, right? So someone who is in a more sedentary lifestyle versus an athlete, maybe
Yep.
that athlete is eating twice as much as the sedentary person. So it only makes sense that they would also get twice as much
Gotcha.
protein, right? Just because as a whole, their intake is also increased.
Yeah. And I think to build on that too, I would say that a lot of the athletes that I work with are like, because of the messaging in our culture right now, they are like more than good on the protein. Like they probably
Yeah.
consume too much protein.
Yeah.
And I would say the big thing that's lacking is typically carbohydrates.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and you see, like for a lot of women that I work with, that's where you see a lot of issues with like stress fractures, amenorrhea, reds in general, because hormonally, kind of what we need to like support, like just the natural functioning of our bodies are the carbohydrates. So it's very interesting how usually even just like Mary, who's like coming off the street and like just like a normal in air quotes person,
Yeah.
it's like she's eating way too much protein. Like it's just like
Yeah.
not necessary, but there's this pressure to consume all of this protein. And of course there's exceptions, right? Like if you are
Mhm.
a bodybuilder, if you're somebody who's like specifically strength training, if you're a lactating mom, like things like that, like pregnancy, we do kind of focus on the protein and making sure that people are getting enough. But I just think with where diet culture is right now, protein is like the best thing for you. So most
Yeah.
people are kind of like good on that one.
Oh, isn't that funny? So it's gone from like carbs are the demon to we don't even know about carbs anymore because we just ignore them because we're so
Yeah.
focused
Yeah.
on protein.
Yeah.
And
Huh.
I don't know, Nick, if you've noticed this as well, but I also find that in a lot of my sports nutrition, clients, a lot of the times they are so focused on this protein, especially after workouts or, they're having all this protein, but what they don't realize is that even for adequate muscle recuperation, you need to pair that protein with carbohydrate for it to have
Mm.
its full effect.
Yeah.
If you have the protein on its own, it's really not doing everything you think it's doing. But once you combine it with a carbohydrate, you really have that optimal recuperation. And so, even sometimes, some of my athletes who are in physiotherapy because they have an injury, and we still want to keep up their protein intake because they're also repairing muscle tissue through
Yeah.
their physiotherapy, having adequate carbohydrate throughout that will really help make the process
Mm.
whole, you know? Um, so yeah, it is really tricky because it's true that unless someone really has aversions to protein food sources, sometimes with people who are vegetarian or
Right.
vegan, it can get a little trickier. And then, yeah, with them, we want to make sure that the protein is adequate. But like Annick said, a lot of the times they're hitting their goals, and more.
And beyond. So really, we do have to come back to some degree of balance. Sorry, trash truck. No, it's so. I mean, I was just thinking when you were talking about, after injury, and that's very much how I look at postpartum. Is like you've got soft tissue healing, you've got, muscles that have gone through a lot of potential trauma, and then trying to build that stuff back. So we really do need to kind of consider balance. What recommendations do you have for moms that like they've kind of gotten through that first little bit and they're like, all right, I know I'm going to be able to live now. I know I can get through the day and I can take a shower and I can do all this stuff. Like, where should they start to look for help if they're concerned about, getting a balanced diet and getting back to activity, but they're still breastfeeding? Like, where can they look for help? How do they find somebody like you?
Yeah. I was going to say a registered dietitian. I would really, what's tough too and of course, like I feel like and I'll speak for Stefanie and me, but like we have a really like holistic, inclusive approach where we do take into account like how are you running around and what does your life look like, and we won't necessarily recommend that you like bake muffins once a week if that's not doable. So I think trying to find a registered dietitian, and the reason for that is just that we kind of are part of a professional body, so the recommendations that we make have to be evidence-based. It's regulated. um, I'm trying to think if there are any resources that people
It's
can read
It's
or
hard to
YouTube.
find, and this is where, I think it's taken me so long to find, people like you is, like, I have friends that are in the dietitian space, but she's like a diabetes educator, or they work just with eating disorders. I really think it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, finding somebody that is specifically focused, and maybe it'll change with the trend that moms are becoming more active and more concerned about food. Like,
Mm.
and so I think, we had a conversation when, before you guys came on, that
Yeah.
we started to work with some clients together and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And just, I think even just asking, what do you know about, working with moms, and the fact that you guys are going through it, I was like, okay, you've gone through it. You understand
Mhm.
what's going on.
Mhm. Because I think moms can sometimes get like brushed to the side,
Yes.
or if you have professionals that are very much like sports nutrition related, I think that culture
Yes.
can be very toxic. Not all of it. Obviously there are changes that are happening, but I think it's tough to find the kind of like postpartum sports
Right.
nutrition and like holistic approach.
Right. But also too, like, and I think this is going to come up more and more is, now that we have more younger women having resources for disordered eating, you're going to have times in your life that that's going to come back, and you're going to need to revisit that, like in pregnancy, like in postpartum, like when you're, trying to return to training and things like that. So I almost feel like it's like a wave that,
Mhm.
now that we've got some more education for our younger girls, our younger women, ideally there's going to be more of you guys that are going to be able to address these pregnancy and postpartum issues. There's more conversations about red S. Like, I feel like the wave is coming, and maybe we're just at like the tip before it sort of crests and becomes the norm. And again, just more postpartum education, period.
Mhm.
Mhm.
At least
Yeah.
I hope. This trash truck man is just hanging out here. Sorry to my editor. All right. So before we wrap up here, I have some questions that we've been asking some of our guests, and so curious for you guys, what's your favorite activity since becoming a mom? Stefanie, we'll start with you.
Hmm. That's a good question. It's hard to bring it down to just one, but um, one of the things that I really love seeing in my daughter specifically is when we have like a little at home dance party. I
Yes,
just love those
the
because
best,
I think it is so impressive to see such a young being. You put on a song that they like and it's like their body just like knows it wants to move to that. And I think the just watching a little kid be so intuitive about movement is
hmm
so like it's funny, but it's so nice to see that, hey, like movement is supposed to be so fun. And I
right?
think that ties into, as a mom, it's really refreshing to see that. And you're like, I don't have to do, like a kickboxing or a Pilates or like a CrossFit just because that's what's supposed to be,
Yeah,
the physical activity for an adult.
yeah.
But just watching a kid have fun and moving their body
We had a
spontaneously, I think I really like that.
we had a dance party this morning. My daughter's into like she'll pull like songs that she hears off YouTube or things like that, and so she's into a Tribe Called Quest right now, which I think is hysterical. I was like, "All right, girl, let's do it." So, Annyck, how about you?
This one's going to be so boring, but I love sleep even more since becoming a mom. Um, so I just find like when I actually can sleep and get good sleep, I'm like, wow, this is such a gift.
Right?
But I've always
Mhm.
been somebody who really appreciates my sleep. Everyone that knows me will say that, but I think I appreciate it even more now since being a
Yes.
mom.
Sleep
So
and like a really good poop are like my
yeah.
two. I can say that this is dumb. All
Yeah,
right,
a
one
quiet a
one piece.
quiet coffee is also up there typically.
Yeah.
Well, and usually a quiet coffee will lead to a really nice poop. So there you go.
There you
Always
go.
related.
It's
Yeah.
all connected. All right, one piece of advice for new moms. We'll start with Annick.
I think for me, the advice that was really helpful was like to not rush things and
Yeah,
um to like be patient and compassionate with yourself. So
that's
um
hard.
I found becoming a new mom was so humbling. And things just don't follow the books that you read and it
Mm.
can
They
be
still
really,
don't.
yeah. No, it's so hard for somebody with my temperament because I'm like, I'm doing all the steps. What's wrong? So it's advice I think that I really do not want to at all pretend that I know how to implement it. But I try to anchor myself to that and to be patient and really trust the process and to kind of sit back and say like this is actually a human, like humans are all different, and um kind of give myself some grace. But I if somebody knows how to do it, I'm really, you can email me.
Half the time when I'm sharing things with people, it's to retell it to myself. So,
Yeah.
Steph, how
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna go along the same lines, but if I
Mhm.
can maybe nuance it a little bit, I would also add just, um, trusting the body throughout, whether it's trusting it through the pregnancy, through the, giving birth part, which, let's not forget that's a big chunk of it too. So,
A little bit.
and again, like trusting your body and what it tells you in terms of, if you want to be doing movement or not and how much, and trusting your body in it telling you, about your food cravings and what you want, and how much it wants to eat, and all of that realm of like food and physical activity, that your body does have a lot to say about it. And it is hard to be in tune with it when there is so much going on, but sometimes if we can reconnect with that little part of us, it can be really helpful to direct our decisions.
Yeah. So even when it tells you to eat Scrapple, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Exactly.
All right. This can be like anybody that, that's in your professional space, anybody that like is in like the public space. Like, is there anybody in pregnancy and postpartum that we should be paying attention to? Any voices out there? Who are you guys paying attention to and watching?
I really like Jessie Mundell on Instagram. She's, I believe
Another
she's a
Canadian.
yeah, it's
She's a
really
trainer.
about like kind of like intuitive movement. And I love how she's like, if you have 5 minutes, like here's something you can do to move your body. Another thing, I don't know the author's name specifically, but there was a book, I actually lent it to Steph too, called I think To Have and to Hold. And it's about mothers postpartum. And I just found the way it was written was something that was really helpful to me when I became a mother. Like she kind of talks about this like anger you might feel for your husband, even though he's supporting you and things like that, that it just felt, even if you don't relate to all the chapters, it feels so nice to have this book that kind of says
Little
all
validation. Yeah.
yeah. And I would really read it postpartum because I feel like before having the baby, I've been like, I'm not going to be like this. Like, it'll be fine.
I wish I could figure out a way to like implant everything I know into like, because I know I was that person that was like, oh, that's not going to happen to me, or my baby won't be like that, or my delivery. Yeah. I've got to find some way to like transplant that thought.
It's so hard.
I know. Steph, how about you?
Yeah, maybe this is a bit of more like lighter content, but one of the influencers that I like a lot is the Birds Papaya. She's also Canadian.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And I think I connect with her a lot because her daughter is just a month older than mine, and so there's a lot of matching up there. But she normalizes a lot of the postpartum body, a lot of the postpartum changes, and it is a little bit lighter, and it's not so much of a how-to kind of account, but sometimes we need lighter things to do when we're moms and we have our brain full of things going on already. But just navigating, how to be with your kids and in your body, and she like normalizes stretch marks a lot, which is just very, very normal, like, so normal. And so I really like her personality, and I find that she does bring in some humor
That's
into that
awesome.
as well.
I think I need to be entertained, especially if it's 2 in the morning. I need to be entertained. All right, and then last one. What does it mean to you to be an active mom in postpartum? Steph, we'll finish up with you.
Mm. Yeah, I think for me, what it means really is just movement that seems natural and fun. And so for me, that's a combination of, kitchen dance parties, but also walking my dog, but also, doing that yoga session for myself every now and then, going for a run, but well, not now that I'm pregnant, unfortunately, but going for a run all by myself, and so that mix of family outings, going hiking and doing these things. And then also, movement that's just more for me specifically.
Awesome. And then Annyck, you wrap it up.
Excuse me. I think for me, like the concept of flexibility really comes in because prior to being a mom, there was like a very rigid like training plan and training schedule and this performance-based aspect. And I think now it's similar to Steph, like how do we move as a family? How can I like bring my son on, a run, but then when he starts crying, it's like we change the plans and we come home. So I think a lot more flexibility around what does being active look like and what does it mean, and really remember that for me, I just want to be an example that like being active in our household and our lives can be really beneficial outside of like performing and body shape and all of that culture, and more just about being outside and having fun and getting to know different aspects of our body.
That's awesome. And that will continue on no matter how old they are. So that's the good news. You get that down and it'll keep going. Thank you, ladies, so much. If you guys want to learn more about Steph and Annyck, you can find them on SöömaNutrition.com. And they do virtual, which I love because I think moms, we just need to meet them where they are. So thank you guys so much. And congratulations on your first and on the second. Please let me know how I can be helpful. All right, thanks,
Thank you for
ladies.
having us, Carrie.
Thanks.